Hey everybody, welcome back to video. So, tearing another fun and random episode, guys, this Friday because we're going to be going over another one of my recent arcade pickups. If you can't tell already, this is a Namco System 2 derivative board, and it is going to be Lucky and Wild, the best game that runs on this board in my opinion. I've been looking for one of these forever. I was able to find one both cheap and working, and that's always a win when you collect arcade hardware. So we're going to go over the entire board, talk about what's going on, how to set it up, what the game actually is, and whether or not you should buy one for yourself. Don't get too far involved, it'd be a huge favor down below. Hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But I did a video on Lucky and Wild almost 4 years ago. I have loved this game ever since I've seen it in arcades, and while it does emulate on MAME, as a real hardware collector, I figured why not pick one of these things up, because it is very likely this could be reverse engineered for Mr. FPGA as well. And any of my hardware that I own is always available for research to competent developers. But if we take a look around the front, it's a very interesting PCB. It has a small filter board that has both power as well as all of the controls and video signals coming out on multiple different connectors. It does have a JAMMA edge as well as a secondary edge behind that board, and I will show you that towards the end of the video. But this is how I got it in, so I will have to rewire this entire thing, which is going to be the biggest modification project I've ever taken on, because this is a racing game with a wheel and pedal set that also has a full XY potentiometer gun, so you can actually shoot the bad guys on screen. This is a racing home mod along with a light gun home mod all wrapped up into one board, and it is going to be an absolute mess of a modification. I regret already having decided to do it, but you know I love modifying weird boards to do even weirder things, and I will do a part 2 on that if you guys are interested, so leave me a comment down below. And the good thing is there are pinouts available for this, and I do have this connector, although it's readily available. I could just repin this very easily, and that's probably what I'm going to end up doing, because pretty much all of the signals are coming off the filter board either on the power side or on that multi-pin connector side. Because the filter caps are on this board in and of itself, I can't really bypass it, at least for most of the inputs. If we take a look at the actual PCB, it is quite large. This did come in as working, but it looks like it's seen a little water in the past. There's a little bit of rust, and anytime you're trying to evaluate how well or poorly a board is kept, looking at metal cases and looking for signs of corrosion are always a good idea. This slides out, it's on 2 rails, and you're going to see once we finally get this board out, it is absolutely massive. This is one of the biggest Namco PCBs I have in my collection, and that is my hand for scale. As I take a look at the boards, they are just absolutely lousy with chips. There is a chip for everything, and the CPU side of things here is quite interesting on arcade hardware as well, because I will show you in just a moment, but this runs on dual Motorola 68000s, so it is a dual CPU setup, and this is derivative of the Namco System 2 hardware, but a little bit more powerful in spots. If we take a look right here, you're going to see the first Motorola 68000, and if you go to the bottom of the board right towards the edge as well, you're going to find the second Motorola 68000. Dual CPUs are not that uncommon in arcade boards, but they weren't the most common thing either, and seeing dual stock 68000s on a 68020 is quite interesting in my opinion. It's also interesting how close they are together, because these have a shared bus as well as some pins and traces that are going to go to independent buses as well. The way this entire hardware is laid up is quite interesting, and I always love going over some of the hardware aspects, but it makes total sense that this has dual CPUs because this game came out in 1992. The level of graphical detail, the rotation, the scaling, and the pseudo 3D effects, all while maintaining 60 frames per second, is absolutely spectacular to look at in motion, and I can't wait to get this thing wired up and working on my PVM and through my RetroTink 4K. But it's a very pretty game, and it needs the hardware to be able to actually push all this imagery. Let's take a look here. We're going to see another Motorola CPU. There are 5 CPUs in total on this board, some for the program ROMs and drawing graphics, and some on the sound side. And there's a ton of empty sockets as well, because this top CPU board was used for multiple games and multiple different configurations. Really, this is always going to be a Lucky and Wild board, 1, because I want to keep it that way, and 2, because I really don't have all the chips to convert it over to anything else. And if you take a look at the side sound over here, you have all of the different hardware for your audio, including all these potentiometers, and it's very interesting. You can adjust the bass and the treble independently on the board, and you don't see that very often. You're going to see we have a bass potentiometer right here, and speaking of the sound, it is quite good on Lucky and Wild. Go ahead and listen for 35 seconds. I'll come back and tell you more about the hardware.
Watch out! No! My God! Okay, let's go.
That's some awesome music with stereo separation and really good sound samples as well on the voice side of things. And you'll see we have so many different socketed chips on this board, some labeled, some unlabeled. This is an absolute mess of chips. It's like opening up a big bag of Lay's, and this one isn't even fully populated, but you'll see the two different banks here for voice 1 and voice 2, Lucky and Wild. That gives you all of the different voices you're going to be needing. And you'll see here on the actual program wrong side as well, you have all of the silk screens marked for data. Namco love to do this. Other manufacturers wouldn't be as clear. But this is a 2-board setup. We've only looked at the top board, so we actually have to move around to the bottom, because on the top is the CPU board and on the bottom is going to be the video board, which again is a derivative of the System 2 hardware, and every single game on this derivative has a different setup for the video board. It might add chips, it might remove chips, but even though this is all one quote-unquote platform, every single piece of hardware is going to differ between games. So like I said earlier, this is always going to be a Lucky and Wild board. And the amount of chips here, again, is just absolutely ridiculous. This is some of the highest populated PCBs I've seen in my arcade collecting days, and I've been doing it for near to 2 decades now. If we take a look a little bit closer as well, you're going to see just how many other ROMs could actually be socketed on this board. It was built for very big expandability, and on the video side of things, it's going to hold all of the graphics down here. And you have different chips that are going to handle different things. Some of the rotation, some of the scaling, and I'll go over it in just a minute, but the road in and of itself has its own dedicated chip just to be able to draw that infinite plane that makes it look like the road stretches to infinity. You'll see here it's marked as land and rot. Rot is going to be rotation. This entire section of the board is just to rotate sprites. You'll see it does say System 2, but this is a derivative with enhancements. They basically just expanded on the overall board, and that was very common in arcades back in the day. But if we take a look at this building on the left here, you're going to see, if you didn't know this was a pure 2D board, you could almost be confused for thinking those are flat shaded polygons, but with the scaling and the rotation, the effect is sold, and this infinite road right here as well is just so impressive. If we take a look at the system specs here over on System 16, you're going to see that there's some interesting hardware that has that entire rotate and zoom tile plane section that we just showed you on the board, and that each graphic board is going to be completely different depending on what game you're playing. And the reason it has that chip dedicated just to the infinite plane for the road is because every game that ran on this System 2 derivative is a racing game. There are a bunch of dip packages on this as well, and they're set to completely different things, and I don't have a manual for the dips. I know this board was shipped to me working, so all I do is take a photograph, so if I do need to adjust anything blindly, I know the place to set it back to. You'll see there's another dip package here, as well as a bunch of socketed chips, and this expansion port on the left hand side, because this is the 2-board variant, but you could plug in another subboard down below and increase the graphical capabilities of this board even further. I can only find one very grainy photo of it, but it would look like this, and it is just interesting to see how many boards you could actually get on this thing. There is an unsocketed area that says Key US. It is unpopulated and the board does run, but I'm assuming that must be some sort of security device to make sure that these boards were not modified, but honestly, them being so different, it would be hard to modify them in the first place. And if we take that filter board off, you're going to see we have a full JAMA edge here, but on the top, none of the filter caps are going to be there. Then we have a secondary edge, which is going to basically control all of the inputs in and out for steering, gas, brake, and the XY coordinate gun as well. And that's the interesting thing about this game. It is so multifunction. You are driving, you're accelerating, you're hitting the brakes, you're holding that XY potentiometer gun in your hand and pulling the trigger at the same time. This in action is a ton of fun, but it's going to prove to be a very difficult modification because I'm going to have a wheel pedal set as well as some sort of mounted control stick to allow me to actually move that reticle and shoot the bad guys. And you'll see here on the back of the filter board, that's why they're called filter boards, because the filter caps are generally there. All of the inputs are in line here with filter caps, so I can't just go directly from JAMA into my super gun and bridge that edge connector. I'm going to have to go through the filter board, because without those filter caps, most of the inputs will not be read correctly or at all. So I'm going to definitely have a lot of wiring going on for me in the future. If you want to see a video of the actual modification, leave me a comment down below, or if you just want to see the end result, tell me as well, because shooting these modifications on video takes like 5 times as long as making a video like this. The angles are always crazy, and it always cramps my hand. But I got a Lucky and Wild board, a game I have always wanted, and I managed to get it for one of the cheapest prices I've ever seen, and that's always a great thing. And hopefully one day we can play it on Mr. FPGA, and if a developer ever wants to take a shot, you can borrow my board, just send it back to me working. share that. Hope you had fun, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.